recording of the presentation right now, and this will be made available to all of you and other champions and members of the network who aren't able to join us. And if you have any concerns with it being recording, just feel free to shoot me an email. Great. Erin and Dara.
Great, thank you, Daniela. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out that there's actually, Daniela is in the photo you're looking at. Later this afternoon, a big part of our team here at Detroit Future City is actually going on a bus tour to look at kind of vacant land in Detroit and observe it in its native habitat, if you will. And we weren't able to bring you out onto a bus tour today, but we've added a lot of imagery here so you can get a sense for the kind of texture and character and quality of different neighborhoods and different flavors of vacant land in Detroit. But that said, my name's Erin. That's me in the background there inspecting a peach tree. I am a program manager here at Detroit Future City. I manage the programs, and I'm trained as a landscape architect. And that is a picture of me. That's Dara. I'm Dara O'Byrne. I am an urban planner working on land use and policy for Detroit Future City. And together we make up about 20% of the Detroit Future City Implementation Office. We are a small group, and our work is to take the Detroit Strategic Framework, which you see here. It was a plan that was conceived through a fairly extensive process and launched actually in January of 2013 out into the world and into our city. The framework was born through an extensive engagement process, conversations with thousands of Detroit residents, Detroit business owners over about a 2.5-year period. And that was paired with work by a technical team, so planners, consultants, technicians, really from around the world who were brought together to conceive of the framework. And the heart of this framework is actually the future land use vision for Detroit. If you're interested, the entire framework, we have copies of the book at our storefront here in Detroit. You can also view the entire framework, all 380 so pages, on our website. The book was released in January of 2013, and the Implementation Office, which was formed to bring the framework to life, opened about 1.5 years ago. This is what it looks like outside right now. We're in a storefront on one of the main boulevards here in Detroit. And I mentioned our website. It's DetroitFutureCity.com. On there you can see the range of initiatives we're working on presently, and download a searchable copy of the framework. And I wanted to touch briefly on how we work, because I think this is important to underscore. I know we have folks coming from the private sector here today, folks that work in the public realm as well. But something I wanted to clarify is that we're a small team, but we're a transdisciplinary team. So in the image, we've got Dara on the far right with an environmental background and a certified planner. There's also a data analyst, someone with a real estate background in this image. If you squint and look far in the back of the room, there are 2 public health specialists arguing with me about something in a good way. But the transdisciplinary quality of our work is, I think, something that's shared by other participants in the Wild Cities Network. We also work as an organization collaboratively and through partnerships. So these are drawings that some of our participants made in a project we're working on right now in the office. And because we're really only 10 people, the ability to kind of bring the framework to life, which addresses everything from land use to economic growth, to how to infuse neighborhoods with arts. The ability to do that with only 10 people is limited, and so we rely on these partnerships and collaborations. And then third, I just wanted to underscore the fact that we work in a range of ways, and you'll see that today with what Dara and I share, that we use both memos and our bootstraps to get things done. And so for all of you plants people, I threw in an image of a lovely lawn with some lovely Phragmites growing in it to kind of highlight the contrast of these two strategies.
So Erin showed the future land use vision, and a very significant component of that is the transformation of the significant vacant land that we have in the city into an integrated open space network, which is shown here on this map. And we really see this as an opportunity to transform what is usually considered as a liability that detracts from quality of life into an amenity that improves quality of life for all Detroiters, and just generally provides many opportunities. So the reality of our land, which most people hear about, is, we have over 20 square miles of vacant land. This is the statistics that are in the framework, and these we actually even, most of the statistics are even bigger or worse now. I think some of the other statistics that we often refer to are related not only to land, but related to health. And we have over 3 times the asthma rate than the national average. We have 69% of Detroiters are obese or overweight. And all of these kind of statistics that are throughout the framework really help to inform and prioritize the open space network. I think this statistic is a fantastic statistic. We have 1 vacant land for every 6 residents within the city of Detroit, which helps you kind of picture the kind of maintenance and ownership issues that we have with the amount of vacant land within the city. And on average, even though we have this vast amount of vacant land, the average vacant land is really only in 2 to 3 parcels or lots. So it's very interspersed with existing residential, vacant, and occupied residential and other buildings. So we don't have a lot of contiguous vacant land for large-scale projects, although that is part of the vision. And the vacancy continues to grow. So we have had a massive and focused demolition, blight removal strategy within the city of Detroit. But what that means is that as we remove buildings that are blighted and that do have significant issues from crime, safety, and neighborhood stabilization issues, when you remove those homes, you're creating more vacant land. And so we continue to see more and more vacant land added each day within the city of Detroit.
So at this point, you might be asking, how does this relate to principle number 2? Well, we kind of went through the list and evaluated which principle would be the best to highlight with the work that DFC is presently advancing. And the second principle really jumped out at us. So this notion of documenting the kind of value of ecosystem benefits from protected and restored wild nature in Detroit is something we're working on almost every day. The trick is that we aren't using outright the same terms. So we took some liberties. I hope, Daniela, you won't get too upset. We removed from principle number 2 the terms that are less present in our kind of everyday speak. So we're constantly in dialogue about the potential, the value, and the benefits of our inventory of land in the city to provide fresh air, to clean water, to contribute to the resilience of our city and our region, and very importantly, to improve the quality of life for Detroit residents and Detroit business owners. Something that's kind of not in this principle, but that is also very, very present in the work that Dara and I are doing, is the ability of this land to create jobs, and also the real need for kind of land use planning. And so that's what we're going to get into together today. So to highlight how DFC is working to document and value ecosystem benefits in Detroit, but maybe not through the traditional conservation-oriented terminology.
So we are building on the Detroit Future City strategic framework, which, as Erin mentioned, lays out a 50-year land use. And I think what's really important about this land use map, for those of you that aren't familiar with the framework, is that it was really based on, it's an evidence-based work, and the thing that undergirds this future land use map are something that were called framework zones, which really looked at existing conditions on the ground, the percent vacancy, the market, the existing market in different areas, and then based on a number of other factors related to existing conditions, really helped the people that were involved in both from the technical side and the community engagement side take a really evidence-based look at what is our city, well, what was our city at the time and where we want to go in the future. Detroit has traditionally been a single-family residential town with very little differentiation between land uses, so it was either industrial or single-family. And this new land use really looks at our land and the way we use our land in a different way. So the opportunity to really focus growth in certain areas of the city and in high vacancy areas transform vacant land into an open space amenity. So we've taken this land use map, which has a number of different, from traditional residential, which is the yellow, to the oranges, which are more mixed use, and we've simplified it into what we often refer to as our strategic agenda. So taking all those land uses and really piling them into 3 categories. We have areas of growth where we know we need jobs, where we need to have opportunities for Detroiters to work within the city. We know that we need people to have higher density options for living, so mixed use and just more multifamily development to provide for to enable better transportation, accessibility, and access to amenities and things like that. And then in the yellow, we have the areas of stabilization, which combine both the traditional residential and green residential areas, which really focus on residential areas that we know we need to stabilize in order for the city to succeed. And then we have these kind of turquoise areas, which are the transformation areas. And these are the areas that have the greatest potential for transformation into an open space amenity. I think the other important thing about this map is all 3 of those things depend on each other. We will never have a successful growth strategy unless we have a successful transformation strategy. In other words, if we just continue to allow development to spread throughout the city as it had traditionally, we will never get the densities that we need to support our city systems and create fiscal sustainability within the city. At the same time, if we don't stabilize our neighborhoods and create a value proposition for people to stay and live in the city, we will never have the tax base to support the areas of growth. And we need the open space transformation areas to improve quality of life, ecosystem function, and health in general. So all 3 of those things really need to work together. The other one thing that I'll mention is that the green is not the only open space areas. And when we talk about open space, we talk about a full network that really connects together. And it needs to connect not just those transformation areas, but it needs to connect all 3 of those areas. So we need the network to go through the neighborhoods, the stabilization areas, and through the growth areas. And they can do that through this network, whether it's through buffers, greenways, but all of the areas need open space. It's just going to be different types of open space. So I think it's also really important to clarify what we mean by open space. If you were to open the framework today, you would see that we referred to that land use typology as innovation ecological or innovation productive. We've kind of moved away from that terminology and just have started referring it to as open space because we feel like it's a little bit more accessible, and because we want it to be more open than just ecological and productive. So we think it's important to always define what we mean when we talk about open space. So obviously we refer to parks and recreation, but the important thing is we currently can't maintain the number of parks and recreation facilities that we have within the city. So when we talk about the open space network, we're not usually talking about adding additional parks or recreation. It's about coming up with strategies to maintain the ones that we have. So we often talk about other types of open space when we're talking about adding or transforming vacant land into something. So we talk about adding ecological or natural areas. And this is not a picture in Detroit. Erin promised that we would show pictures of Detroit, but this one is not. This is an aspirational image of having urban forests, meadows, wetlands, riparian corridors, things that really provide an ecological function. And even though Erin mentioned we aren't at the point where we are frequently talking about biodiversity and ecological function and things like that, we still know it's valued, and it's valued by certain people within the city, and we know that it still is important, even if it's not our regular language that we use every day. But we do know that it is important for the city. We also talk about green stormwater infrastructure, sometimes called blue infrastructure, sometimes just called green infrastructure, but we know that's an integral and important part of this open space network. We know that our gray infrastructure system is expensive. We know that we have issues with CSO overflows, so we see the opportunity to use our land to actually manage stormwater in an effective and natural way. It has a lot of potential. We also talk about productive open space uses, one of which is urban agriculture. We talk about community gardens or even urban farms when you start to get up to a larger scale. We're just starting to have conversations about a livestock ordinance, which would include animals. Currently, we're not allowed to have animals, but we're working on that. We also talk about, when we talk about productive, is energy production, whether that's solar energy or other kinds of energy production as a way to use our land and create revenue and create opportunities to produce energy. And then, of course, how do we connect all these spaces through trails and greenways? This is a picture in Detroit. This is the DeQuinder Cut, which has been a successful trail development. But in order to connect those three different areas, the growth, the stabilization, and the transformation areas, we need to have these connections through trails and greenways, and also through vegetated buffers. And we often refer to either industrial buffers or carbon buffers or highway buffers as a great opportunity to use vacant land to buffer the numerous highways that we have running through our city, to improve air quality, water quality, and improve noise and things like that, improve quality of life for residents. And then the same thing with industrial land. We have a unfortunate history within the city of placing industrial development in the middle of residential areas and not buffering or transitioning between uses. So there is an opportunity to use some of this vacant land to really buffer those uses with vegetation and have numerous benefits. So when we talk with community members or policymakers who really want to focus more on the growth and the neighborhood stabilization, why open space? And we think it's really important for a number of reasons, because we make the case that you can't stabilize neighborhoods unless you address the vacant land. You can't actually have focused growth unless you. But these other reasons as well. If there's opportunities to replace gray infrastructure with blue infrastructure, to manage stormwater, to clean air and soil, to generate food, jobs, energy, and commerce, and the connections we already talked about. And then through all of that, there will always be opportunities for recreation and play, even if it isn't a sole focus. So one of the things that I think where we are right now is that Detroit Future City laid out the vision, and Detroit Future City is a framework for decision making, but it isn't the decision itself. So we are at a moment where we have a vision for open space, but we don't actually have the plan that can turn that vision into reality. So what we spend a lot of our time right now on is advocating for policy reform and advocating for an open space plan to really lay out all these different types of open space within the city. So the point is that more work needs to be done, and one of the challenges that we'll kind of summarize at the end is that we often hear that, well, we already did the planning, we don't want to do any more planning, but the reality is because DFC is so high level in its planning level, it was a citywide plan addressing many different topics, it didn't drill down into all the specifics that we really need out of an open space plan in order to understand what goes where. So some of the things that we really feel like we need out of an open space plan is we need to understand what types of open space go where in order to lay out those different types of open space we just talked about. Where is it appropriate for them to go from either an ecological standpoint or just a function standpoint, but also where does the community want it? So you could say, well, this area is going to be urban agriculture, but if nobody in the community wants to actually do urban agriculture in that area, it's not going to be helpful. So it needs to be both based on, the science, are the soils right for this type of open space use, is the location right, and then also what does the community want, and is there a demand for that kind of open space, and who's going to own it and maintain it. We also talk a lot about how do we ensure a balance between the different types of open space to ensure that we don't go too far in one direction or another. And this really comes down to we need to establish what the community and the city's value is for open space. So, some of the different open space types have a higher ecological value. Some have a higher community value, quality of life value. Some have a higher revenue value. So, you could have a developer come in tomorrow and say, we want to do all of the vacant land in Detroit as solar panels. But is that going to actually achieve what, and it might be the thing that actually produces the most revenue for the city, let's say. But it might not achieve all of the other goals related to stormwater. It might not achieve all of the other goals related to improving quality of life and improving sense of community and things like that. So we think it's really important to have that balance, and we don't have the answer yet, and that's why we need another plan. We don't know what that balance is. And then, of course, how does it all connect? It's not just going to magically happen. We need planning. We need to identify the different areas, especially through the growth areas and stabilization areas where demand is higher for development. We need to protect open space to ensure that those connections can occur and that open space can be maintained over time. And some of the biggest challenges that we're struggling with right now, and that we're actually working with a team from Center for Community Progress on, is who owns and maintains these different types of open space, what models are there for that, and how do we pay for it, and what are the different mechanisms for the different types of open space. So for urban agriculture, it might just be private people doing urban agriculture, but for some of the other more natural systems, there might need to be different mechanisms for that. So in terms of how do we begin, some of the things that we're working on right now, we continue to advocate that we need an open space plan. So we are doing a lot of work about making the case to kind of get over that hump of planning fatigue and say, we know we did a lot of planning in the framework, but we need to get into the weeds right now and actually, come up with this network make it happen. So we're doing a lot of work on making the case, white papers, presentations, and we're doing a lot of work to build a constituency that can also make the case for us. So right now we're working on a lot of one-on-one interviews with different stakeholders that work. Right now there's like an urban agriculture community, and there's a greenways community, and there's people doing stormwater, but they don't always talk and see themselves as relating to each other. So we really want to start bringing everybody together and make sure that all the diverse needs are really represented. We also are doing a lot of research about location considerations that I mentioned before. We're working on policy reform with the city. So we do a lot of technical assistance with the city, coming up with disposition strategies based on this future vision. And then we also work to try to remove barriers when we can, whether that's legal barriers or concerns about takings issues and things like that. So we've provided technical convening. We had a technical working group that really worked on some of the legal issues that the city has been concerned about in the past, and really helped them to feel more comfortable with this as a long-term vision for the city.
And so Dara, definitely leads the work with our policy and advocacy around this. Something that is parallel that we both do, which Dara just spoke to, is this convening of stakeholders. On the one hand, with our policy and advocacy work, this convening is around building consensus and awareness. I'm going to speak briefly to this notion again of working collaboratively and through partnerships, but through the lens of convening stakeholders to actually articulate the value and discover the value of our vacant land, of the kind of quiet potential for wilderness, for conservation strategies that are kind of dancing behind an economic development strategy, if you will. It's a weird metaphor. So we have a lot of lots in Detroit, and there are lots of lot jokes you can just invent in your free time. But I wanted to kind of land us in reality that this is what a lot of our lots look like. It's actually from the east side. And before we can talk about introducing new strategies or plants, for example, things that are short, like fescue, that would reduce maintenance needs for a parcel, or plants that have other benefits. So this is catnip. Before we could have that conversation or enter into that conversation, Detroit Future City was curious how we could stimulate greater participation in this dialogue about land transformation in Detroit. And so in the fall of last year, we started in on this project, a field guide to working with lots. More puns are hidden there if you look closely. But the field guide is primarily a website. So we're making a website that has print-off resources and an associated workbook. And the website is a housing for a set of site designs. So we're working on 35 site designs for single, double, and triple vacant lots in Detroit. And these site designs are described in kind of very technical terms through black and white construction documents that are appropriate for landscape contractors. And they're also described through civic terms in really some, I think, beautiful printed documents that are intended to be a resource for neighbors and residents as they engage with actually making these diverse landscapes. So if you imagine Dara working from the kind of top-down policy level, the field guide is working more from the bottom up. So how can we pair design with a civic-facing process to discover alternative strategies for these single, double, and triple vacant lots that persist throughout the city. And so what we've been working on is this open source tool that's launching later this summer that's really a tool for land and for people. And on my end, as a landscape architect and not as a civic engagement professional, the learning about really making broadly accessible resources that describe designs, but to everyone, has been it's been a real learning experience. So the field guide is targeting 4 types of users: neighbors, residents, institutions, and government in action. This is a range of constituents who we've been convening through the process of making this thing. And part of that convening has been a moment for the stakeholders to articulate their values in this kind of ocean of vacant land. I describe the project as being an exquisite corpse process. I don't know if you've ever played the game, but there was a request early on in our process that we convene smaller conversations as we develop the content. Small groups, 12 folks or less, workshopping different themes and aspects of this website, of the designs themselves, of the added content that is on the website beyond just the site designs, but landscape contractors, permitting processes, the whole 9 yards. And it's been interesting to have a kind of rolling participation where not, everyone's touching a different part of the elephant. And as we're zooming towards the completion of the first phase, the elephant's about to walk out the door, and it's going to be a lot of fun. One way we've ensured this by having these kind of workshops galore is by developing a set of workshop expectations. So that although folks may be touching the project and the process at different increments and rates, some people once a month, some people are in here twice a week working on this with us, but there's consistency across the dialogue and the decision making. We've also had a lot of fun times with the whiteboards, and it's useful that we have several walls in our office that are actually completely whiteboards, but to really take in a lot of feedback and opinions that are grounded in experience about how this tool can actually be a use to residents and neighbors engaged in land transformation. So some things we agree upon quickly to just ground you. The site designs are targeting individual lots rather than the scale of the neighborhood. We're largely creating residential site strategies, but we have a few commercial site strategies as well. We're assuming that the author or the implementer has legal permission to do what they're doing. They have site control through either a land lease from the city or they purchased the land themselves. We're delivering site designs that address all three timescales. So interim, we've got some just warm season ground covers, some site designs that are appropriate for a short-term 1 or 2 year time horizon, as well as permanent installations that won't really experience their return on investment, if you will, until we call them the heirloom site designs. And we've also tried to balance the reality that some folks have capital to put into this, like government in action, especially when we start talking about water, and others have time. They may not be able to buy materials, but they may be interested, for example, in improving the health of their soils over time. One of my favorite site designs actually involves earthworms. And then also back to Dara's the kind of land use overview, we are targeting the areas of transformation and stabilization as the landing spot for these site designs. The areas of growth behave very much like a, quote, normal city. So the expression of green infrastructure or the expression of how we include spaces for habitat or even for recreation are practices that we can more easily translate and borrow from other cities. So the website has a series of site designs. We can also print off site designs. These are a few of them here on the screen. And then we have a workbook under development. I wanted to run through very quickly a couple of the site designs so you have a sense of them. The friendly fence is one of my favorites. It's a soft way with a rain garden of using a living edge to divide one parcel between two occupied homes. So this could be reinforced through a legal process where you actually split the parcel and the neighbors are each paying half and half taxes on it. But the idea is to introduce a colorful planted soft divide between neighbors wishing to split a lot and not wishing to use a fence. Another one, there's a lot of interest in having site designs that address the potential for land to create revenue. This is one of our heirloom strategies, the syrup maker. I fought and did not win. I wanted amaranth as an option that you could add into the ground plane. So you could have a complete brunch experience with the syrup maker. But we're looking at different kind of maple species that are good for harvest. And then the last is the native butterfly meadow. which is one of the strategies we're using to create habitat within the city. We have a handful that the priority are habitat. Of the 35, we have another set that are that create habitat but don't announce themselves primarily as habitat creating strategies. And what we're working on through this is, and what I wanted to emphasize is the value through participation, both in the process of kind of creating the field guide, building relationships, and also in participation through implementation of building the landscapes, participating in a vision for your neighborhood. And I thought this might be appropriate because I was hoping there'd be some conservation-minded folks on the line, but we talk about the ecosystem of actors related to vacant land in Detroit, and just like in a normal, so this is a diagram that could be Detroit, it's actually from Baltimore, but this is a diagram that could be of organizations in Detroit, and I wanted to underscore that sometimes, just like a real ecosystem, we have invasive species here, we have bad ideas that show up from New York and think they're good. We have charismatic megafauna that shut down conversations or encourage conversations, depending on what's happening. And this is just all the more so true when we get into land transformation. And it's part of the open space network. So not just the spatial implication of where this lands, but the people and the relationships that are required to actually make this happen. One example was we got really hot for parking as a green infrastructure strategy, and some charismatic megafauna kind of quieted that conversation, but we've slipped in a couple of kind of habitat-friendly parking strategies into the actual field guide. And then lastly, education. So we talked about, Dara talked about our work with policy and advocacy. We've both touched on how we convene stakeholders, either to kind of build or articulate a set of values helpful in advancing the work. I shared with you one of the open source tools we're developing, and then I think behind all of this at every step is education. This is something we're working on as part of the field guide. It's now called A Little About Lots, and it's intended to be a resource to describe to all Detroit residents the kind of benefits of green infrastructure and kind of ground everyone in a little bit of useful information to participate in the dialogue. So it's been a really fun piece we've been developing. So yes, green infrastructure, it's not a highway for trees, right? But even arriving at this language, I mean, there are so many conversations to get here. And the field guide will be live this summer. If you subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get a blast when it's released. But I think we wanted to wrap up with some of the challenges and learnings and then open it up for questions. I know we're running a bit behind. I can start by just noting that I think one thing that we've had to learn to navigate is how to acknowledge that there's a learning curve here that we're going through, and how to create a safe space for the ecosystem to learn together.
Yeah, and I think I already mentioned the planning fatigue and the need to balance people wanting to see action, and the need to balance that action, which is going to be really good, but also balance that with longer-term agendas and longer-term vision, and how that all relates to regulation and policy. In other words, we need to have a clear plan and have clear policies in order to ensure that we can achieve what we want over time.
And I know Danielle will be sending out this presentation to the group later today or tomorrow. We've added our contact information at the end if anyone would like to follow up separately. So Dara's card of my own, but we'd like to open it up to questions if anyone has questions.
I think everyone is unmuted, so if you do have a question or a comment, feel free to speak up. And if for some reason you don't have a microphone, you can type it in the chat, and I'll be happy to read it to the group and have Dara or Erin answer it for us.
This is Rich Gamble. This looks really wonderful in terms of a city urban center based approach. Do you have any similar studies for a more suburban based approach, or would you follow the same, would you take the same tack that you did here?
I can start by kind of qualifying what I would consider a suburban context. And I'm not a planner, just to put this out there. I think a lot of our city is actually suburban. So we have areas that are very large scale, almost exclusively residential land uses, where we have commercial corridors that are underutilized and kind of may be stabilized or may not be stabilized at some point in the future. And those are the green areas on the map that Dara highlighted in the beginning. I can kind of zoom all the way back to the map. But we're actually presently working on a project to test green infrastructure strategies in a neighborhood that's in one of the and so I'd say that the process, I would think the process would be very similar. So here we go, the green areas.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to clarify, did you mean for open space or the DFC framework in general?
Well, I guess the way the real estate of the Cook County Forest Preserve lands, it's kind of like an arc going, around the city, with some areas touching the city proper. So I'm really impressed by this because the City of Chicago Park District seems to be more analogous to what I'm seeing here as it relates to the Chicagoland area. FPD, Cook County doesn't own lakefront property, or in your case, riverfront property. We're pretty far away from that. So, but however, the city of Chicago itself has the blighted areas as well, and vacant lots and things like that. And we were just talking about this very same concept yesterday at a meeting. I think this is really cool. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how we can borrow from what you've done here, and how much of this footprint on the map that's on the screen now is literally Detroit proper versus suburbs.
So the map that you see on the screen, this is all the city of Detroit. And in the Detroit Future City Strategic Framework, we call for regional participation and things like that. But the land use plan and the land use dealing with the land is, most of it's really just focused on the city itself, because our vacancy issues are drastically different than the suburban condition just on the other side of the border. And I'll also say, just from a reference standpoint, I think the transformation areas that you see on this map are both, there's opportunistic in the sense that they're the highest vacancy areas, but that they also have, amazing, great potential. So many people often talk about, shrink the city and put a buffer around it or something, but some of our strongest residential areas are on the outskirts surrounding the city, and some of our highest vacancy areas are right next to the core. It's not necessarily what you would think unless you're really familiar with Detroit.
And if I can add on to that, if you click out, we do have mostly a ring of a regional metro park system that, if you squint enough, begins to look necklace-like. And I think from an engagement and advocacy an educational standpoint, the process of kind of convening folks that may have different values and also definitely have different territories they're stewarding, and developing a common currency is something that is really important if you're working in an urban or a suburban context. Another, I would say, parallel between the kind of Cook County perhaps and Detroit is that we really have kind of spatial stewards. So there are people that are de facto in charge of certain neighborhoods and areas. Largely they are directors of community development organizations, and just as in Detroit's metro region, different suburban communities have different agendas and priorities. The same thing is true with our community of community development organizations who are bringing different agendas and priorities to the table. And that's I think the work is establishing that common currency, whatever it is. So as we said a few times, we're not able to lead with conservation. I think there's a growing chance for us to lead with water here in Detroit, but finding that currency is important.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
This is Jan Hibbs in Duluth, and I have a question. I think it's related to that in a way, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the intersection of the field guide and the strategic agenda with the areas that you've identified for growth, stabilization, and transformation. I'm wondering, as this field guide goes live and gets out into people's hands, and you've got block groups that are excited and doing some of these site designs, what does it look like as far as kind of guiding that, where things happen, or if there's technical assistance needed and things like that? If you could speak a little bit more to that. And the reason I'm asking is our city is just going through kind of the removing barriers stage where they're getting a process in place for vacant lots to be used for urban farming. And so that's kind of a hot topic here right now.
Yeah, I will do my best. So we actually have we have 6 partnerships in process right now for construction, for building examples of these lots, and they are largely with community development organizations who had funding in place for some type of land transformation activity, but they did not have the technical in-house resources to conceive of something outside of urban agriculture, maybe a dog park on a good day. And that's at the kind of heart of the field guide, is to expand the palette of what's possible. What we've already been doing through these partnerships is providing the technical assistance to work with community development organizations, go through a neighborhood-based, quick process where the parcels have already been identified, but then we work with the community to kind of sort through the strategies present, the values of the neighbors and the neighborhood, and the budget of our kind of collaborator, our partner. And we actually have 15 lots that are finishing construction today in one neighborhood, although the field guide is not itself live and kind of fully out there. And so we're working on the kind of institutional and government and action partnership side on the one hand, and on the other, we're building out what that kind of midwifery looks like right now. So we're in conversations with our funders, with the folks who've been doing this work in Detroit for much longer than we've been an organization, to understand what actually works, what we're capable of with, again, our team of 10. So some examples of that: we've got a phone number, a 1-800 number that's going to be set up. The website will, of course, be live in there. I have a meeting here in just a few minutes with some stakeholders to talk about our engagement strategy as part of the soft launch. We're intentionally delaying a kind of press release big moment until the end of the fall, after we're able to get the majority of the site designs into construction, because one great learning from our experience with the Center for Community Progress is that these are really the first amongst the first landscapes to be built in Detroit that are for purposes of habitat, for purposes of stormwater, for beautification and neighborhood stabilization, and the with design present, right? So if you leave folks who don't work on land and don't think about land every day alone in a room to figure out what to do with a lot, there's a limited number of strategies that the group will come up with, and to expand that palette. We understand, and we're also learning that part of that expanded palette includes the fact that we love to prioritize Detroit suppliers for these materials, but in some cases, like the earthworms are a great example, we can't get the volume of red wigglers we need from kind of scrappy Detroit worm growing operations that exist. We have to reach out into the county to get those worms. And same thing with a lot of the native seed suppliers, that there are actually gaps in the supply chain. And we know that really the next year is going to be spent learning through construction and learning with our partners. So the midwife, though, is this key strategy that we're actually borrowing from a program that Nora ran in New Orleans about 4 years ago. They sent a landscape architect out to do house calls. They no longer run the program, but the woman who did that was, we had a chance to meet and connect some dots a while back.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Just one quick follow-up. But then, so as far as like the process, if a block group wants to implement one of the designs on a lot, they would go to, like, that process is spelled out as far as if they need a permit, or so they would go to one of the CDCs or one of the institutional partners, and those would be where those conversations would happen.
Yeah, and actually,
they're able to just pick it up and run with it.
Yeah, I didn't touch on this at all, but the workbook we're doing, it's not it's actually very field guidey. So it's not intended to be a summary of the content on the website, but rather it's a resource for residents and neighbors who are actively engaging in land transformation. So it's got, you know, the directory of suppliers and contractors, like a permitting navigation chart. Turns out that landscape is totally not regulated in Detroit. When you get above an acre, it triggers some stormwater stuff, but there are very few design regulations. So it makes permitting in the moment quite easy, unfortunately. But we're developing a series, and we do this through the workshop. So we kind of go into our cave and invent something we think is a good idea, and then our stakeholders rein us in and say no, or someone's already done that. Or here's how you can make it better. And we're aiming for this very open, accessible language and content that helps connect residents into the process of land transformation. I think there's been real questions about accessibility, accessibility to the process of who can purchase land, who can lease land. And under our new mayor, there's growing transparency about all of this stuff. But for years, everyone's been in the dark. And so one of the points of emphasis from our stakeholders has been that this accessibility is really, really key to participation. And that's in where the bulk of our effort has been aimed, as in creating, through the print-off site designs, a very accessible tool that anyone could pick up and use. You know, take your shopping list to, you know, even Home Depot or Lowe's. So we've got some site designs that emphasize the use of very broadly available plants. I mean, there's a range of things that this is why you invite folks into your process, but we're starting to describe the kind of ease of construction, including if you could take a bus to haul your materials home, or if you need to rent a truck or a car. So the actual, you know, transportation cost associated with each of the site designs. But it'll be an ongoing process.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Erin, maybe just one last question that we got in the chat. I was curious, who pays for the implementation effort? and who pays for the staff at Detroit Future City?
So for the implementation office, we are funded largely by philanthropy, by our kind of regional big philanthropy. We are a startup, and so the plan is to diversify the resources we're bringing in. Presently, we're managing a grant from the EPA, a grant from a national foundation, grants from state and local foundations, but the bulk of our operating budget comes from the Kresge Foundation. In terms of who is resourcing the implementation of the strategies in the field guide as one example, we are working that out right now. So there's an interest in connecting residents directly to these activities through something like a mini grant program. We are in dialogue with the city and with the state about funding opportunities there as well. And my next meeting is a conversation with our stakeholders about what the highest value implementation lift can be, where DFC should direct our resources from their perspective towards resourcing implementation.
Great. Well, thank you both so much and everyone for joining us. And as Erin said, she'll be sharing this presentation with me and I'll send a follow-up email. If you joined the webinar and weren't part of my mailing about it, you can shoot me an email just so I can make sure to share the resources with you. And that's just Daniela, DANIELA, @wild.org. And I'm sure Erin will share all kinds of fun things along with the presentation itself, and we'll also have a recording. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.